Tell me your pre-film school life. What was your experience before coming to AFI?
So before AFI, I did graduate in film and new media studies at Wheaton College. There are two Wheatons. There's one in Norton, Mass, and there's one in Chicago. I went to the one in Massachusetts. So I studied film and new media studies over there. And once I graduated, a lot of the work in Boston was more like videography, freelance, company videos, and things of that nature. I've also tried different jobs, being a digital media coordinator, and I've worked at a high school for half a year. So it was good experience, like learning how to work and everything, but it wasn't film. It wasn't what I wanted to do long term. And I did a lot of research on film schools because I feel like I needed to go to film school to make connections, to know people, because I didn't, before AFI, I had a very weak film network. So part of the reason I looked into AFI was because it would provide me the network I needed, and I would meet other people who were also passionate about studying film. So that's really what went into that decision. But life before AFI was more different type of jobs. It wasn't exactly the kind of editing I wanted to do. It wasn't as creative, putting a story together like you would in a fiction or in a documentary. Like it really didn't. It wasn't exactly like what I was looking for, especially after college, right? Because after college, you would like to work in something that you feel like is progressing you towards something. But being in Boston, other than learning how to be in a work environment, which I picked up a lot of soft skills, like being in an office, working with a boss, and working with a supervisor, and those kind of things, learning how to email and all those things you learn just working. But if I wanted to progress in my career, I had to be at the right place. So it was a lot of it came down to between moving to New York or Los Angeles. And I
And
feel like
moving to, were you thinking about New York for a different school?
yeah. I was also looking at NYU at the time, and just because New York is so close to Boston, it wouldn't be as dramatic of a move if I had gone there. But for editing, the scope just wasn't the same for LA.
Right. So talk about that move. Like, first of all, like that's a big move across the country.
Yeah, no, it happened. It happened really, really fast. I was on the waiting list for AFI, so I found out very like 3-4 weeks before I moved to LA that I got accepted into AFI, and I have this short time to make a decision whether I want to move across the country. And but I knew,
Crazy. You had 3 or 4 weeks to make that life decision?
yeah, yeah.
Jeez.
At the first news was I got in, I'm in. So that was a lot to process. And then at the same time, the person told me on the phone that you're gonna have to make a decision whether you want to go to LA, and you're gonna have to do it soon because we start in a month from now. School starts, boot camps. She was laying down the whole schedule. It was just a lot to take in at once, but I pretty much had to make that choice. And
That's big time. Did you drive out here? Did you do the cross country
no,
drive?
I flew out here. I flew out here, and getting adjusted to moving, living on my own, and all those things I had to learn very quickly, as well as going to film school.
Yeah, I mean that's the one thing about like, coming to, I mean, I can only speak to AFI, obviously. That's what the experience I know, but people that relocate for it, it's like the good part and the bad part is it's all consuming AFI, right? So
Yeah.
you don't have time to do, like, it's not like you need to go out and, get to know the city and make friends. It's like, no, you are at school all day, every day. But
Hmm.
that's also the bad part is you could then go through your whole first year and then not know anything about the city.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I wasn't alone though. Like in my class, I met a good friend of mine, Selinda, which we
Yeah.
we connected on social media like shortly after we got accepted. With the Facebook groups we joined and everything. She was also an editor, so like we were talking about it. And when I got to AFI, she was the first friend on campus of mine, and
And she moved from China.
Yeah. I think she was living in Toronto at the time she moved.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Still a big move.
It's still a big move, yeah.
Yeah.
And luckily a lot of our classmates, I think there were only maybe a handful of students I knew that in my class that lived in LA, that were local to LA.
Yeah.
Everybody was coming from different countries, different states, and it didn't feel as jarring once I got to campus and met a lot of students in our year that they had come from different places, different cities, countries, but at the same time, it was a little bit intimidating because you're going to be working with them and they're everybody. I feel like our class was unique because everybody was so different. Your favorite movies, your favorite TV shows, what kind of films that you like to make and everything. I feel like our class every time I was working with a different director during cycle, I was learning more and more about like what type of movies they like, what type of shows that inspire them, and what kind of content exists out there that I didn't know about before coming to LA.
Yeah, that's probably the good part of that, right? Is like you were being exposed to all of these different films and television shows that you weren't aware of.
Yeah,
And then those started informing you and educating you and then also what they're showing in class, right?
right, right. Yeah,
So what
yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, what is your first like visceral memory of AFI, like of being on campus?
The first memory, really, it was the first day. The first day of coming in, meeting the other students, talking about the different disciplines, and then shortly after we were in a screening for a movie. I think it was Edward Zick. I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah, I remember
He
this.
Yeah, he screened a film that he recently worked on, and then he asked for I don't even remember which movie it was.
Wasn't
I
it?
think it was I think it was no, it was I think it was a Terminator film.
No, no, I think it
Oh
was
no,
it was
it was
Jack
a
Reacher
Tom
2.
Cruise it was a Tom Cruise movie.
It was Jack Reacher 2.
Jack Reacher 2, yeah.
It
It
was a
was
rough
Jack,
cut. Yeah.
yeah. He was showing that was the rough cut.
Yeah, well, it wasn't finished. I know that, which was like that rarely or almost never
Yeah.
happens that
That
someone.
never happens because usually with Suburbicorn and La La Land and Moonlight, we had all those in our first year.
Yeah, that was a good year.
That
Yeah, but
was
because Ed is he's an alum and he wanted feedback on his film because he was in post production
mm-hmm.
and then he knew the AFI world and he was like, whoa, this is kind of a cool different thing. So
Yeah, and just being part of that and then seeing some of the other students just give their aggressive like critical feedback in front of like a legend. Because I'd seen it, I'd grown up seeing his movies Glory, Last Samurai,
mhm.
and this was somebody that I already had a lot of respect for it, and seeing some of the other students just talk about this film and what worked, what didn't work, was this kind of it was good seeing that a guy's experience as him is out there still learning, still trying to improve. But at the same time, it's almost like if they're criticizing his film like that, then how they're going to be with our movies, our short films. Yeah.
It wasn't too long until you found out the answer to that question, huh?
No, right?
Narrative workshop.
Narrative workshop. Yeah.
We'll talk about that. Talk about because that can sometimes be shocking. I think I don't want to talk. I don't want this to be too specific to AFI. I want it to be about film school, but like when
Yeah.
you get into graduate school, I think things are a little more intense. And one thing that maybe a lot of people haven't dealt with before, like real criticism of your work.
Yeah.
Talk about that, like
Mhm.
and how you reacted to it those first times.
Yeah. Well, before narrative workshop, a lot of our teachers kind of prepared us for it. They would give us the advice: take the criticism that's constructive and will improve your film, but then you also have to decide what criticism, what construction advice of your film would be destructive to your movie, because everybody is thinking about how they would tell the story,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time they're not as close to the story as you've been, and and not to take it personally, but it's hard because when you've not been in that chair where people are coming directly at you, and some of it may have been personal, and you just have to filter that out and be able to take it. And just seeing the directors in a narrative workshop not being able to respond to criticism and everything, and all that was definitely a good learning experience, because we tend to be defensive and we want to say why we did something a certain way. But the learning experience was the way your audience reacts to a movie. That's going to be like it's organic. You, of course, like, you want them to feel a certain array of emotions, but when they give their response, it's without you telling them how they're supposed to feel about it. It's organic. Like, this is where my film, my project is making people feel, and these are the notes they're understanding. Or it also gives you awareness to, like, oh, I didn't know they saw this scene this way, or I didn't know this particular beat made somebody laugh or cry or think of something. Those are like the experiences I tend to remember the most. Like, when people talk about things in your movie that you personally didn't spend too much time thinking about while you're constructing it, and then hearing other people give you feedback, like how they really felt about it, what they thought you were going for, and everything. Like, those are the things I enjoyed hearing over and over again from different projects I worked on. And then, of course, there's then there's a difficult criticism when they're criticizing the editing or the music choices or things like that. Then you're like, wow, like, that's it's just
like they're attacking me right now. Yes.
Yeah.
What's funny is, like, I'm sure there were a lot of comments too where they were complimenting it, but you don't remember those as much.
No. Yeah, you don't. It could be 9 or 10 good things they say about your film and everything, but then there's one comment where they say something where this moment took me out, or I didn't believe this, or I didn't believe that performance, and it's always that's the one you remember, and those are also like the students you remember, the ones who said those.
It can feel like it's personal, and you remember the people that say them, and then what the interesting part is, then very soon after that you are giving comments on other people's work. And I'm sure sometimes people want revenge. Everyone's human.
It happened more in the editors workshops than in the narrative.
Really?
There were some, I won't say any names, but there were some editors that would definitely do that. Like, if somebody was critical of their work, and in that same class they were presenting a film later, they were getting feedback that way, where it was clearly personal.
That's what I would remember. It was the thesis, test screenings, right, where the first year fellows would give feedback on a thesis cut, and the first year fellows would always be so brutal, and they would be mean in the comments. I think because they thought, they were like, we don't have time for this, you're wasting our time. But they would be like, what is this piece of crap? And they wouldn't take it that seriously. And I would always think, like, hey, you're going to be in this position next year where you're going to be showing your thesis cut. Don't you want those first year fellows to give you constructive feedback? Never made sense to me. They never thought past the moment,
Yeah, and a lot of it is like they try to sell that it's not personal, but some of it is. Some of it is personal. Like, either they're having a bad day, or they feel like they're being forced into the screening.
Yeah.
You could definitely see it with narrative workshop. I feel like the first month of school, or first 2 months, like cycle 1, everybody was, I think, as fair as you could be. But then as it went on, people were way more brutal.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. I might say, I don't know about the word fair. I think it's everyone's kind.
Yeah.
And maybe they also a little tentative to give real criticism, because, in the beginning, everyone's getting along, everyone's being very supportive. And then, yeah, as you go on, either you're getting more personal. I'm sure that comes into it, but also I think then people are also getting a little more honest,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
just
that
feels personal because they're being honest.
yeah.
Are there any specific comments that you remember from that class that were pointed at the editing of one of your films?
One of my films, I remember one comment, or they were commenting about visual effects or something like that, where we had a cycle film where we did a split screen where a person had like a double personality, and in the film you'd see him talking to himself like in the same room. And it was a tricky effect to get, with the limited time we had, and it was pretty well done.
Mm-hmm.
There was one comment where one director said that for this movie, I don't know if that effect made sense, and that the how good the effect was took them out of the film, because they're just like, this is a cool visual effect, but it's taking me out of the movie because I'm not thinking about the plot. I'm just thinking about, wow, it's cool that he's talking to himself and you see him in both of him in the same room. So that
Yeah.
that was something I remember, that was probably towards editing, and that was a comment where, like, I don't know what I can really do about that, because that was kind of the design of our film. And then but a lot of the editing comments are usually involve
Mm.
sound and music. Those are typically the editing related comments I remember, like whether some people really liked the sound design choices and everything, or some people felt like they wouldn't have picked that score, that music for that particular moment. So a lot of it was sound design choices.
Yeah.
Only
Um,
in the editors, only in the editors class you'd get like specific choices where I would want to stay on his space more, or I like that we were with this space and saw less of this person. You wouldn't get those comments in the narrative workshop. It was always about actor performances, cinematography for sure. And then when it came to editing, it was really sound design that got critiqued.
so did you get more out of those editing analysis classes where it was more specific to editing?
I feel so. I feel so because we all kind of understand the nuts and bolts of each other's craft. So like the feedback is very specific for that that skill set. And
Mm-hmm.
the directors would probably say the same thing about the directors workshop, when you can get into the nuts and bolts of a performance, directing a particular actor or actress. I think those individual skill workshops work for that, but I did find the narrative workshops helpful as well, because it was also, you have different disciplines, different people commenting on the film as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very important to get feedback on the whole piece of it. I think
Yeah.
that's as important as getting criticism or feedback on just one particular part of the film.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The other part of that class, we're talking about a class called Narrative Workshop, where you would show your first year project to your whole class, and then your team that made the film would sit in front of the audience on stage, and you
Right.
couldn't talk, and you had to hear the criticism. That's what the class is for those watching. It's a very unique class, and it's really powerful. But the other half of that class, right? One half of it is you make your film and you learn how to listen to criticism, and you learn that after you make a film, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It's the audience's, and they tell you what it is. But the other half of that film, the other half of that class is learning how to critique.
Yeah.
And can you talk about how you learned how to critique better through the course of not just that class, but your AFI, tenure?
Yeah, no, no, for sure. Because before, when we would go to movies, we'd always comment on the actors, how they performed. You would never think about the other aspects of the film. Maybe once in a while cinematography, but the narrative workshop really improved the way I see films now, because now I'm not just thinking about the acting. I'm not just thinking about the directing. I'm also thinking about the composition, score choice, the production design, how a set was assembled. Thinking about like, is this appropriate for this world that they're setting up? Did this design choice, did this music theme, did this score, did the actors performing in that space, did it all work? And you're thinking about which areas could have been better to sell us more on those points, or which areas needed, or which areas worked really well. And
That's good to hear. So since the focus of this is kind of life after film school, I'm going to start transitioning you out of AFI
okay.
in this journey, even though I know I have a million more questions about like, you know, the actual experience. But talk about like, well, let's do this. You finish, like, it's kind of weird how you finish AFI because thesis films kind of go on forever. Did you have one of those that bled into post graduation?
I did.
Yeah. So when did you actually finish AFI?
I would say 2018 November. I was pretty much done with thesis. And in
Graduation ceremony was in what, June?
June, yeah.
Yeah. It's such a weird.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. It was like on and off, you know, but I was done with thesis in November, and I'd gotten my official diploma sometime in December.
So
But yeah.
as you're finishing, like, are you able to start looking for work and those first opportunities while you're finishing your thesis?
Yeah, I did. I started working a couple months. I know we had like a month break, or like a couple months of in between August and September where there was nothing left on thesis. Like we were almost I was picture locked on one, and then I was almost picture locked on the other, and the director needed a break, or we got a break. So between August and September, I didn't have much thesis commitment, so I started looking for work, and I started joining Facebook groups. You know, need an assistant editor in LA, like those kind of Facebook groups that alums would tell me about, or that I would see other alums on my Facebook following.
Mm-hmm.
I applied to this one documentary production company, Boardwalk Pictures. They were looking for an assistant editor. I sent them my resume, and they got back to me pretty quickly. I'd also submitted to others, but they were the ones that got back to me quickly, and they were intrigued about the fact that I had Urdu and Hindi on my languages.
Ah, that's a good tip. It's a good tip.
Yeah, and they were, you know, they wanted me to come in that the same week, and they didn't even specify what the project was until I came into the office. And then once I came into the office, they were like, "Yeah, this is going to be for a Netflix show on street food. We have an episode where our chefs are Urdu and Hindi speaking, and we need someone who understands those languages to edit those bites for us." So that was kind of like, and that was like kind of like my
Bites.
first.
I see what you did there. Those bites with street food.
It was a good experience, because while editing and seeing all the footage of the food and everything, it was tough not to get hungry. But
that's funny. So something as little, you know, everyone thinks it's like, oh, their experience and the films they worked on, but something as little as the languages that you speak was what got you the first job.
Yeah, it got me my first job, and it happened to be with a very reputable doc production company, Boardwalk, and the showrunner was Daniel Milder. He was the showrunner on Chef's Table and a bunch of other documentary series and shows. And you know, I got to work directly with him and his story producer, you know, watching the cuts that they've already done, and giving my feedback on technical things, but as well as story points. Like, okay, he's not actually talking about his businesses yet. He's not talking about his kebab business yet. He's talking about something else, and then finding those specific moments and making string outs, working closely with the lead editor, story producer, and director, and also just learning how to work, because in AFI we were exposed to scripted, but this was like a non-scripted documentary, and just to find my niche and get a lot, being able to come in, have a lot of creative freedom because they're dependent on my understanding of the language. So I got to get
Were
a
you the
lot.
only one in the cutting room that knew?
Yeah, I was the only.
Language? Yeah. Wow. So you could have totally screwed with them.
At times I'm like, are these actually going to get fact checked or something? Because with documentary editing is very different from narrative. A lot of times you're simplifying things that the subject is saying, and a lot of times you're reconstructing sentences. Sometimes it happens a lot, like when they show B-roll or archival on the screen. A lot of times the interviewee they're reconstructing what he's saying.
Right.
But with a language that they have no familiarity with, it's kind of hard to do that.
Right.
And they were kind of on a tough deadline, where they were looking for someone who understood the language and would help them, but they were really fortunate they found me, who not only knew the language but also knew how to edit. So it just sped up the process, and because of that, I met a lot of different producers who were working on other shows at the same time, other episodes of that same show. So I got a lot of connections through them, and then they pretty much helped me get more work.
So that first opportunity led to more work.
Led to more work and a lot of documentary work, and I was really grateful of it. And then at one point it did kind of collide with thesis a little bit, because it was a full-on job, 4 months. So that was,
You were like, hey guys, I gotta go finish my thesis. Like, we thought you graduated.
Yeah, so for a couple months I worked long days at Boardwalk in Santa Monica. Then I would drive in the evening to AFI and meet with the director, and it was kind of, it did get a little bit intense, because like some of the people on the team were like, oh, he's got a job now, or whatever. So
Oh, they're like looking down on you because you have a job now. You sold out, man. You got a job. Wait,
yeah.
so talk about the job part of the job. Were these hours going towards union hours?
Yeah, they were. So a lot of the reason why I started working in documentary early on, because it was just the easiest way to get union hours. Because when I started working in independent films, I went back and forth between docs, because even after this first project I did make a network, but it wasn't so much so where I had steady work. Like I like there would still be a couple months or here and there where I had to work on something else. So that's when I did independent films. But with independent films, it's kind of tricky, because it's just not like the technical things like stubs and things like that just weren't the same. So it just made the paperwork part of it, proving those hours, just a little bit different.
Right. Did this job, or did you get in the union that first year?
That first year, no. I did accumulate a lot of hours, but I still had to do more. And then later on, the following year, after I graduated, I'd gotten onto a show for Showtime in 2019, which was a year after I graduated. I'd done during the end of my graduation year, I'd done those 4 months. And then almost half a year later, I'd done independent films. So I did want to keep my scripted skills and, up. Because I feel like after doing the documentary and doing thesis, I wanted to cut indie films, and I wanted to see what that was like. So after doing indie films, I did learn a lot, but in terms of the financial burden I was picking up, I needed to go back to docs.
So if you're okay, can you talk about like the rates, like what an indie film would pay per, I assume these are all weekly rates, versus what an assistant editor on a docu-series would pay?
Right, right. The thing is, a lot of indie films, they'll offer you a flat fee like upfront,
For the total, like finishing the film?
total finishing the film, and it would be low.
Yeah.
It would
Yeah,
be
because they
low.
don't necessarily know how much work will go into that, right?
Nine out of 10 times, it's a first time director. It's an actor directing and producing for the first time, and they have no idea what post production world is like, and so that was kind of difficult to navigate through and learn and set boundaries. They'll want you to work weekends and days that they're available to work,
Yeah.
versus with a non-union documentary assistant editor job. Most of the time it's Monday through Friday. You work a 10-hour shift or 8-hour shift. And then if need be, when you're in the finishing stages, they'll ask you, can you work overtime? Are you going to be able to work overtime? Do we need to bring someone else in to work a night? Like they'll ask you those questions, just like I feel like you would get on a studio job. And some of these non-union doc assistant editor jobs, they would even provide lunch if you're working on site. Like the couple Netflix shows, The Ugly Delicious, Street Food.
Yeah.
They and even We Are the Champions. They provided lunch a lot of times.
Were those Netflix shows, were they at the Netflix building?
No, so the shows were with different production companies like Dirty Robber, Boardwalk. Like they would create the content for Netflix.
Okay. I only asked because when you said they would provide lunch, I've been over to Netflix and seen their catered lunch they have every single day,
Yeah.
and it is impressive.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, so I felt like this environment, it will be more so where I want to be.
Yeah.
And I can
So
always edit indie. I feel like I can always do that and do indie films like whenever I want to.
right. Well, you talked about like it keeps your skills sharp as an editor. Can you talk about the different sets of skills you need for like an assistant editor, right? And for a lead editor, but also the difference between, if it seems obvious, but narrative storytelling and documentary, and how your narrative skills, right, helped you in this docu world.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like the narrative skills, you're all often cutting around emotion, performance. So those same things apply in a documentary film. You're looking for somebody's emotional bites where you can see whether they're truly passionate about something they're talking about. You're thinking, is the audience going to be listening, or are they going to be intrigued, or is this a good story? And sometimes it could even be a story not fully related to the topic, but I would go out of my way to try and see if I can fit it in, because the person's emotion and everything is going to build up and serve the greater story. I think a lot of that, and using atmosphere, using composition, using sound design, because with docs, it's kind of like an open field. Like there's some docs I've worked on where there's not really much emphasis on sound design, but then there's some where a lot of where the editors want sound design in there, and the story producers, they want a sound effect or some kind of added layers of feeling to it, versus just hearing a person talk, few images, few archival, and just music underneath, right? Like, and working in narrative has helped me add those different layers to it. And then
Right.
also, when you're going the reversal way, dialogue, like, because of my experience cutting so many interview bites and everything, now when I'm cutting narrative, I think about that. Can I make this? Can I use a combination of different takes to get this person to perform the way they should? And I think having a lot of experience cutting segments and docs has helped with dialogue editing, because most of the time you're cutting docs, you're doing dialogue editing.
Right.
So those skills translate. Now, in terms of assistant editing and editing, assistant editing is you're helping the post-production side with a lot of the technical duties, like ingesting footage. Sometimes you're helping with music, sound effects, graphics, a combination of all those things, as well as helping with scene construction, certain scenes here and there. And when you're a lead editor, you're pretty much the director and producer's right hand in executing the creative vision. Like, your whole responsibility is creative, finding the right moments, shaping up the whole story, pretty much doing a rewrite or a recreation of the script. But a lead editor in documentaries is very different, because you're the writer.
Mm-hmm.
Have a bunch of interview bites, segments, and you're picking the ones that fit, that tell a story. So you're the writer and the editor.
Right. Yeah, you're kind of creating the story. I mean, I know there's like segment producers and things like that, but there's no true director, right? Like in unscripted.
Yeah. A lot of I've been on, and I've been able to watch this from afar. Like, there's some directors who will look at the interviews and give notes, like, I want these bites, I want a combination of these bites, this stuff in the story. And then there's some directors who will give the editor all the footage and just say, just let me know what you come up with, and then they'll give notes. So the editor's listening to all the interviews, looking at all the B-roll, if there is B-roll, archival, and with their assistant editor, they're putting together the whole film, adding layers, sound effects, music, sound design, all those things. And then the director comes in and gives their notes, like, oh yeah, this works really well, or can we change this, or can we look at this? And
As working in unscripted, has it made you a better narrative editor and a faster editor?
I would say it's definitely helped make it's definitely helped make narrative editing easier, because especially if there's a film already put together. Like, sometimes I've been brought on to projects or shows where they already have a cut and they just need help finalizing it, tightening it, adjusting it. And after working in documentary, where you're pretty much part of the process of putting something from scratch, coming in and fixing something or tightening something, especially with narrative, when you have a script that you can refer to, or an old cut that you can refer to. So I would say it's definitely made that part of the process easier. And there's also the technical challenges of cutting a doc, because you're working with graphics, you're working with different visual effects and things of that nature, versus in narrative, it's not exactly the same. So
Right.
So because you have at least you have a script reference in documentaries. You don't really have that.
Yeah. It's good and bad. It's nice having that like North Star, but especially now with this boom of documentaries and docu-series, like they've gotten so wildly creative, I think, because they're not tied to those scripts.
Mm-hmm. You can
Although
use
I've heard that, I guess when you get on the bigger level, like Showtime, HBO docs, there are script minutes, right? There are, before they greenlight a documentary, there is a form of a script of what they hope it will be, right?
Yeah. They're like, with documentaries, I've seen decks, presentations, pretty much of what they ideally like would want it to look like or feel like, but it's still, after like the first cut, they almost never look at it again.
Right. Then it's like starts telling you what it is, and based on what you have. And yeah. So what are you working on right now or recently?
Recently, I worked on I worked on a pretty interesting project. It was because I've done a lot of documentaries with Showtime, and I've worked with alum Diane Becker.
Oh yeah. I just saw her. I was in Telluride. I saw her. I saw her new doc,
Oh yeah, yeah. Which one?
Hollywood Gate.
Hollywood Gate. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She does a lot of different projects. So over the years, I've worked on a lot of her shows, a lot of her documentaries, Showtime, independent stuff.
Did you work on Navalny?
No, I didn't work on that one. But I worked with the editor, Langdon Page. I've worked with him on Showtime, on the Showtime doc, Detainee 001. So, and then the director is Greg Barker. So he wanted to do his first scripted series. But because he's a documentary filmmaker, he wanted to do like a scripted hybrid.
Oh, cool.
That's yeah. It was like one of the most intense shows I worked on because the idea of it, he wanted to tell this CIA story in Beirut. And am I allowed to say show names and stuff like that?
Yeah, let's do it. Plug it.
Yeah. So it's Ghost of Beirut on Showtime and Paramount Plus. So Greg Barker, he wanted to tell this Beirut civil war, but he also knew CIA officers, Mossad officers, and people of that intelligence that worked and that served on the battlefield. So he would have scenes of their interviews where they were talking about their experience mixed in with narrative performances where we would see 1980s Beirut and then in 2007, and you would have actors, performing the narrative, and then there would be, and then during like in a very emotional scene or a very heavy scene, with between the very violent stuff you'd see the CIA people sharing their experience of it, and then sometimes the Mossad intelligence sharing their experience.
And all of those are real interviews.
All real interviews.
Wow,
integrating this narrative piece.
Yeah, that must be so fun to cut.
Yeah, it was. We had a big team. We had another assistant editor, and later on we brought on. I was the lead assistant editor on the show, and I worked with another alum, Christopher Young.
Oh yeah, of course.
In 2016, I brought him on later onto the show when we were almost picture locked. So nice. Yeah, so that was one of the coolest projects I got to work on, because it pretty much put everything I learned about editing and assistant editing in independent and in documentaries. All of that was put to the test on this show and more. And then working with two very good editors, Matthew Woolley and Patrick McKinley, and then seeing them, during being part of the assembly stage, seeing them cut scenes together and being able to share work with them, help them with their scenes, get them everything they needed, and then getting to that picture lock stage, and then being able to bring Chris Young onto the show to help with that, and working with the different post houses and everything, because he's worked in scripted a lot.
Yeah, he's done a couple, at least one feature that I know of, right? Matthew Gentile's.
Yeah, and I had no idea he was available until it was actually we had an AFI, after AFI Fest, we have like we had a picnic, right? Or a lunch or something.
Yeah.
So I ran into him at our, the AFI Alumni Fest lunch, and he said that he was looking for work. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome, because, I needed him on that show.
Oh, when you went to that picnic, you knew you needed someone, and then he said he's looking for work.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Because we needed another assistant editor that knew how to work in scripted or was experienced, someone that could help, take stuff off my plate,
Yeah. Well,
because
so well, I want to drill down on that because it's such a, big part of this. It's like, kind of the focus of this whole interview series is like, is film school worth it?
yeah,
And when you talk about like the network that you have, right, and the secondhand that you can have, and just knowing that someone is AFI, like, did you know Chris and his work, or you just knew him personally?
I both. He was one of the first few people I was friends with when I got to AFI. He had a thesis film that was lingering into his like end of his third year, and he was on campus when I was cutting like my first cycle film. I actually showed him the first rough. He actually saw my first rough cut on cycle film.
That's cool because
Yeah,
he was just happened to be there. He was hanging out finishing his film.
we had, and then we had similar interests in sports, so we always talked. And I think he would even work there part time.
I think you're right. Yeah, I remember that.
So he was around a lot. And so when I ran into him at the FI Fest lunch, and I hadn't talked to him in a long time, and I, and I assumed that, someone as talented as him was probably working on something, but he just happened to not be working on something. Like he just finished a show or some project he was telling me about. He's like, yeah, I'm looking for a new project right now. And then it wasn't at that lunch I was recruiting or looking for somebody, but then a week later, my line producer said that, hey, we're almost picture locked and we don't want you to work like any more overtime or burn yourself out. So we are going to also bring on another assistant editor to our team. But if you happen to know somebody that's good, feel free to recommend. And then I'm like, and then I thought, yeah, Chris is available. I was like,
That's great.
so I reached out to him. I'm like a week or two later. I'm like, are you still looking for work? And he's like, yeah. I'm on a show right now. We're close to picture locking. We need another, help, another, pair of hands to help get this show, because we were on a very tight deadline, and all of us were working remotely. The editors and me and the other assistant editor, because our other assistant editor, Sean Anderson, he was a post PA who had gotten bumped up to AE.
Mm.
And it was me and him kind of the entire documentary scripted shoots, kind of carrying the whole assistant editor part of the job. So he learned a lot on the show and grew a lot. He didn't go to AFI, but he had a family reference that got him onto the show as a post PA. And I helped him get bumped up to assistant editor, and he also learned a lot from Chris, just seeing us work together and seeing us work in Avid and everything. Like he felt appreciative of the experience, because I never felt like with editors there was ever any insecurity or competition. Like we all like to share our knowledge of things, of our experience that could help each other out. So like
I've noticed that with of more than probably any other of the disciplines.
yeah,
They're all very supportive, especially like, technical issues. Everyone's willing to jump in and help. And then in this story that you're talking about with Chris, like you all hire each other or recommend each other.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So like what are the chances of like let's say if I didn't go to that AFI lunch,
Yeah.
I know Chris was a free agent, and and I may have had to work with some non AFI person. Like it just made it so much easier, because when we had our post-production meetings and there were Avid specific requirements, spec sheets, Chris and I were like, oh yeah, we've seen this before, or I've seen this before, you've seen this before. And it was very easy going. Like we were easily able to split up the work and know what to focus on. And we could really rely on each other to take the workload. Otherwise, when I've worked with other people non-AFI who don't have the avid training that we have. They don't know how to work in teams. It's often we're figuring out like who's doing more work than the other.
Yeah.
With
So that's good. So the AFI
Mhm.
AFI does the film school means something, yeah. But
Yeah,
you went to AFI, so AFI means something when you know that they went there, you see it on a resume, etc.
yeah. A lot of times when I'm applying for different shows and they see AFI on my resume, they're like, "Oh yeah, this person on our team, they went there." Or well, yeah, our last editor went to AFI and they were great to work with, and also Diane, Diane Becker. That was like the first thing we connected on. When I met her in person for the first time, she's like, "Oh, you went to AFI," and then after I told her I went to AFI, she would. It's more so AFI alums. I feel like that work in other places. They'll go out of their way to get you onto shows or recommend you to people, recommend you to their colleagues. I would say Diane has done a lot to accelerate my where I started, and then where I am now.
What was your first, how did you get in with Diane your first time?
First time, an editor, Salman Syed.
I know the name, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's from the class of 2013. He recommended me to a line producer that worked with Diane.
Hmm.
And at the time they were starting their shoot pretty quickly, so they needed somebody available that could help on. And then it was on The Longest War for Showtime. It was like the first long-term doc gig I had. That was 6 day, like it was 8 months. It bled into the pandemic when the lockdowns happened.
Some job security there.
Yeah, yeah. That, and then during that show, Diane was the executive producer, and she had come into the office a few times, and but I had no idea she was an AFI alum until the director had a holiday party where he invited everybody who was on working on the show to his house. And then that's when I got to really talk with Diane and mention AFI. And then after that weekend, she emailed me and she asked me to help her out on other shows she was across. And I got the chance to also work with Berenice Chavez. She was
Yeah.
at Chris's.
Oh yeah, I remember her. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to work with her and Diane on an indie doc on the Divide. It was about abortion,
Hmm.
and I think it may have been in the AFI Docs Fest.
Possible. Sounds familiar.
Yeah,
But Berenice, yeah, I thought she went back to France or something. Wasn't she? Isn't she French?
I don't think she's French. She's Mexican, I believe.
Oh, I'm not even close. I'm actually thinking of someone else. I do remember the name though.
Yeah, yeah. I got to work with her, and I remember her pretty well because she was also like Chris. She was also there as I was starting my first year. So and then because I was AFI, she was AFI. She had also recommended me to other documentary filmmakers. So I had long gotten my union hours by like 2020,
Hmm.
all my union hours, but I'd accumulated so many documentary connections, and I was just getting steady work, especially during the pandemic, where
Right.
it was really tough to go outside of your network looking for work.
Sure.
So I ended up spending a year, a couple extra years, just working between docs, doing a lot of different projects. And then right when I was getting burnt out of it and thinking, okay, I think it's time to try scripted. That's when Diane and Greg had the Ghost of Beirut. You
Which
know,
sounds perfect. Like it's the perfect like transitional
yeah,
project to work on, right?
yeah. So I started working on that in last year in the winter of last year, and then I wrapped on the show early May, and then the show literally aired like the week after on Showtime, May 19th.
That's why that usually does not happen, right? It's usually
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
wow.
Post houses were still doing color and sound work on the other episodes as they were releasing.
Jeez. They just wanted that thing out, huh?
Yeah, yeah, that's often how Showtime is with some of these projects. They have a very short schedule where they want things done, and then they want to air it the next day,
Right.
week. So that was cool. But then that's when the strikes happened.
Right. Right.
So a lot of scripted shows I was in talks with were getting shut down from writers' strikes, then from SAG strikes,
Yeah.
which people didn't know. Even I didn't know about it until they had mentioned it. Oh yeah, we're having some SAG issues, so we may be shutting down in August. So I don't know if we're going to be able to look for an assistant editor right now, and then
Yeah. The whole strike thing was, I heard that even some shows were not going, like people found out in January, right? They're like, oh, that we're not going to greenlight that show because there's probably going to be a strike. And I just kept thinking, if everyone knows there's going to be a strike this far ahead of time, why don't we figure out the contract this
yeah,
far ahead? But
yeah,
no, we had to go through this whole silly thing.
yeah. And some of our creative meetings during Ghosts of Beirut, I was the director was talking about things like about Showtime and Paramount Plus. So yeah, he made the strike was definitely mentioned that, oh yeah, they're gonna have some issues, or a bunch of people are leaving or getting laid off or going on strikes or something, and we were all kind of like, what? Yeah, it
So
was.
I'm gonna like we're gonna bring it home because it's been an hour. But
Yeah, oh yeah.
networks, your network has been very important. But you basically built your network.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say network has been the most important thing. All the Facebook groups and those things are nice, but I've found what's been more helpful are our AFI Facebook groups
Yeah.
of the alumni jobs, where we're pretty much sharing jobs with each other, and it's been so helpful because when I've been on shows and the people whenever my go-to people are not available, whether they're looking for a post PA or another assistant editor, I could just go on the group and type in like, hey, the show I'm on is looking for another AE. Or if I'm too busy to take a job from somebody, I
Mhm.
can go on there, I can write something, and then right away I'll get emails and messages of people willing to help, or people looking for work. Whereas like in the other groups, I don't get that kind of interaction.
Yeah. And the world of editing, post production in the industry is pretty strong, right? There's not too much of a lack of work for editors coming out of film schools.
No, because with editing, there's also assistant editing, there's also post PA. And so in post production, there's so much work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost as soon as they're more available. Like I learned that during the pandemic, like how limited, like how much work there is versus how many AEs are around.
Yeah.
Because once I'd worked on the Diane Becker's doc for the whole season, they were filming and editing and delivering. She had passed my name around to so many people at that point, where I was getting 3, 4, 5 emails a month or a week for different shows and jobs. And
That's crazy. I
yeah,
mean, that shows like it's also, it's not just that there's so much work, it's that you did such good work
yeah,
that someone at Diane Becker's caliber, we
yeah,
should mention that she won an Academy Award last year for producing Navalny.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I don't want to shortchange her. She's like one of the top documentary producers. If
yeah.
she's recommending you, that means you are doing really good work, Hammad.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah. I was talking to an alum recently. He was talking about assistant editing during the pandemic. And he said, and I'm not going to name his name and I'll cut this part out, but he said that he was because everyone's working from home. He was assistant editing on 4 different shows, and they didn't know, right? They thought he was just working on their show, but he had like a workflow down, and he could figure it out. And that he was making like, I don't know, $15,000 a week doing that. It was crazy.
I definitely gone on stretches where I kind of did the same thing.
Did you? You were doing multiple projects? They
Oh
didn't know?
yeah, especially during the pandemic when we were all like stuck at home and everything. Yeah, I did 2, 3 shows at once. There have been some months where I worked on 5 different shows.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
See, the pandemic was good for something. You were probably banking some serious money there, huh? Okay, last questions.
Yeah.
Was there anything when you've been in the working world for a good 5 years now, but it sounds like you have like 10 years of experience since you were doubling up on those projects. But was there anything that film school did not teach you that you had to learn the hard way?
Oh yeah. I would say communication with the soft skills will be working with people, especially in on a studio project, because I feel like with AFI a lot of the communication, the collaborative skills translated well when I worked on indie films because the teams were so small.
Mm-hmm.
When you work with a much bigger team on a studio project, whether it's a documentary or a scripted show, there's so many, you have multiple bosses, but then you also, depending on where your experience is, you also have other people working with you or sometimes under you, and you have to know what kind of work to assign them. Like as my experience grew and I had post PAs or just PAs in general that I was responsible for assigning work to, like spreadsheets and things of that nature, and having good communication with them. Because one time one of our post PAs messed up some archival log on the spreadsheet, and I had a call about it, and I was getting most of the blame on that because I didn't check that person's work.
Right.
And just those kind of things, like working in a collaborative environment, where knowing how to work in a studio, on a studio show, I feel like that I had to learn a lot of it on my own, like how to work with people that are, where you have to kind of walk around them, where you feel like you're walking around eggshells around them. Like,
Yeah.
Chris onto my show, like he asked me like, okay, who are the people on this team where I have to be on guard when I'm talking to them, or who are the people that are relaxed? And I'm just like, Chris, everybody on this show is relaxed.
But the fact that he had to ask that means that he's been through some experiences.
Some stuff. Just the fact that I'm like, those are very good questions. Like I'm like, when I get brought onto a show where I don't know anybody on the show, because usually I know 1 or 2 people because I've got a reference, right? I can kind of lean on them. But like when I don't know anybody on the show, I can, like, those are like a very important questions to ask, like who's
Yeah.
to work with or who's easygoing, and things. And sometimes a post PA will go out of their way to tell me that, okay, this editor doesn't like when you show up too late or too early, like just things like that.
No, it's true. Little things like that, like people can be very particular about, and it's like
Very, very particular.
there are a million AEs out there, and they, if you rub them the wrong way, but to start with, they'll be like, okay, bye, we don't need you.
Yeah, it's just like, it's like the modern day phrase, like icks.
Yeah, exactly. The icks.
A lot about when you're working on studio shows, like with producers and leads, whether it's a lead DP or a lead whatever, like production designing or composing. You just have to learn, because I feel like with AFI, you do pick up on those skills to some degree, but everybody's our students.
Right. No one is like kind of like in charge, right?
Yeah.
So you're not like deferring to anyone ever. You're all treated equal. So then you go in the real world and you have a boss, and that boss has a boss, and that boss has a boss, and you have to show different levels of, respect to them, or respect to everyone. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. and then being able to set boundaries with people, because this didn't happen to me at AFI, but I knew it happened to a lot of my colleagues where directors or producers would make them work long hours, 16 hours on a cut. I'm like, no, they're not, none of us are getting paid for this.
That's
So
not cool. Yeah. Or they would like have them take it home and work on it.
no, they would want them to stay at AFI and
My God.
it's,
Overnighters. Jeez.
yeah, they'd spend the entire day with them. Yeah, there were some directors that did that, and people just didn't know how to set those boundaries, So
But you never had to actually put your foot down. You didn't work with people that demanded that.
I work with some that sort of expected me to work outside of that, and and you always have to tell them cordially, like, okay, if I know I'm going to be working this many hours, could I start my day later, or because then I'll work better, or could I
Mhm.
start it earlier? Just sort of, when you know what the work entails, right? Just
Yeah.
sit, or letting them know ahead of time, like, I'm not going to be available this weekend, or during the work week, right? If I have a feeling that this could require a weekend, I kind of say that, do you think that this cut is gonna bleed into the weekend? And if they say yes, then I tell them, actually, this weekend I'm gonna be out of town, or
Yeah.
or, or I'm busy on another show.
Right. Yeah. But with all your experience now, you have a better gauge of like
Yeah,
what an ask, what someone asks you, and then you know how much time that will probably take, right?
probably take. Yeah, I think with experience, you learn those things. Because what was alarming to me during our last that virtual class we had last week was how
Mm-hmm.
many people were asking, how do I avoid taking a bad job?
Mm.
I think taking a bad job, I think, is a very necessary experience, because then you learn, like, what doesn't work for you or what does work for you, or how to deal with that situation. And Brian and I connected after the class, and we talked about, like, sometimes you have to take a job because of a certain credit that will be added to your resume or your IMDb, and it might not be the best environment that you would like to work in, but you have to take it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there are jobs where you could work there, but there's another show where you get to work with, like, your best friends.
Right.
So you have, like, what's better for your mental health too, because that's what a lot of people don't talk about. Maybe after you've been, I mean, obviously you want to go for the better credit, but sometimes, let's say if you come off a show, you've been on it 9 months and you went through hell on the show, is it smart to take another show where you're gonna kind of go through that same beat down again? You know?
Yeah. Can you talk about that since you brought it up, like, which I think is important for all the creative
Mhm.
fields, but I feel like it's most important in editing is mental health. And maybe it's because of all of them, you spend the most time like sitting in a dark room and like focused on a screen. And some people can, get hyper focused and forget to like take breaks and take walks and all that kind of stuff. It's those little things, right? And then the bigger picture, you're on a project for months and months and months. Talk about, I mean, all you can talk about is your experience, but how you balance your life and consider mental health.
Yeah, I think working remotely has helped a lot with that. Like, if I'm not super busy in the afternoon, I'm like, okay, I could take this time to myself to go on a walk, go hiking, or go play some basketball or something. I think having taking that time for yourself when you have the opportunity to do so, I think is good, because a lot of times I was getting burnt out just committing myself and just sitting for hours, days, just committing everything I have to a show and not seeing friends, not seeing family. So as the more experience I got, and the more I realized I needed that, I would do a better job anticipating those kind of scenarios. And if I did leave the house to go do something, and then I get a call from a director or producer that, hey, can you look at this? I can say to them that, I was available this morning, but I didn't get any message or any calls, so I just left the house to do this. And kind of like, I'm crossing my fingers, am I going to get a call or something? But no, they're like,
Didn't
okay,
even figure. Yeah, I know.
this
Right.
right. And I still have it sometimes, and they're like, okay, just just whenever you can get back to it, just this is what we need, and that's it.
Yeah.
Now, if a person really does call you and they have a problem with you taking a break, I feel like now it's more, people are more encouraged to look out for themselves,
Yeah.
and producers will let you know that, do you need a break, or are you sure you want to work overtime or something? I
Yeah.
think because of the whole mental health awareness, producers are way more cordial, and they're looking at, like, Chris on our Beirut show. There was 1 month or 1 week where he was really sick, and we could see it in our Zoom calls that he needed a break. And but he was willing to power through it.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what we had to do and what the kind of work that we were expected to do, but Chris needed at least a day or two off to deal with, like, his illness. And our producer called him privately and told him that, hey, you should take tomorrow and the next day off and go see a doctor or something.
That's really great. That's a good producer that,
Yeah.
you know, sees it in someone else and then is proactively like, go take a break. Because,
Yeah.
I think probably on Chris's side, he's just going to work
He's
because he
just
doesn't
gonna work.
you don't want to show weakness, right? And you just want to get the job done and you don't want to get fired. And, we're all insecure artists always.
Of
Forever.
course. Yeah. And I feel like that's been instilled in us. And but I think bringing awareness to it as much as it has today, I think has made producers, filmmakers more. Oh, not on every show. That's not the case.
No, of course not.
A lot of,
But the fact that, yeah, there's a little more, yeah, mental health awareness is a good thing. And it's good to have a thing, like you said, because your thing has always been basketball, right? Like,
Mhm.
yeah. So like to have that thing so that when you take a break, you go do something else
Yeah,
rather than, yeah.
you come back re-energized, and you have a breath of fresh air, and you're ready to work again. And
Yeah.
it's nice. And but I think what a lot of people struggle with is setting boundaries, because they want to prove themselves. They want to show that they're the hardest worker, first one there, last one to leave, last one to sign off, right?
Yeah.
But I also think it's important to show, to establish those boundaries, because at the end of the day, like, it's still just a job.
Yeah. It's just a job. It's so funny. It's the two sides of our
Yeah.
culture. It's like mental health is more, we're all more aware of it. And there's also the hustle mentality of you got to work, 27 hours a day to be the best, climb
Yeah.
your way to the top. So it's
Yeah,
like
yeah. It
somewhere
is
in between that. Yeah.
somewhere in between. Yeah. So sometimes when a producer, like, sometimes I've had more opportunities to double up or triple up on projects, but sometimes I have to be like, no, I think it's better if whatever free time I have, I just use for myself,
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than,
Smart. Keep
yeah,
doing that, man. Okay. This will be the last question
yeah, of course.
for now, because you'll come back one time someday
Yeah.
if this thing takes off, or we'll just do an HLMS. Film school, would you recommend it? I guess I don't know if that's here's the thing. It's like for me, that's always a case by case. It's like depends on who's asking. Like, should I go to film school?
I get this question asked a lot by my, not by AFI people, but by my Wheaton College alumni. Some of them have reached out to me and talked to me, and have scheduled Zoom calls. This is kind of similar to this, asking my experience and whether it's worth it for them to go to film school or not. And I think it's a case by case basis. Like, if you're brave enough to come to LA or come to New York and just get on the field and volunteer and and break your bones that way, then all the power to you. But if you want something with structure where it'll guide you in a certain path, right? I think film school will help a lot with that.
Yeah.
And especially with connections, building people, knowing people, because everybody at AFI who's an alum works in film and TV. So all the alumni you're gonna meet all are in your industry, and they're recruiting or they're looking to help out. I do think graduate school or film school is really helpful for those who don't have the connections.
Yeah. Well,
And at
that's
the
good
end,
advice. Yeah.
network connections, I feel like. So if you don't have them, I'd say film school is probably the easiest place to go, because you're learning and then you're also building connections at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. You are forced into a network, right?
Yeah.
Which are your classmates.
Yep.
And the odds are some of you will be working. And if you're in a supportive group like you were in and are in, then you will help each other and you bring each other up. So
Yeah, and it's not just like a lot of times when the editors come and they talk about like class specific. I don't think it's just your classmates. I think if you also are friends and you know editors below or outside of your class or like above you or below you, I think that's pretty helpful.
well, like Chris, right? For you.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then
no, you're right. It's all the people that you'll be in that bubble, that they'll put you in the bubble and all the people around you, right? And
yeah,
if you are forward thinking and if you're ambitious, you'll realize there is a huge network of people that are 5, 10, 15, 20 years out that
yeah.
you have access to, right? When you go to,
I went to every thesis screening I could, at least my first year. And I think you've seen me at some of them.
yeah,
I didn't know everybody, or sometimes I would go to a screening and I didn't know anybody on the show. But then after this film, I'd talk to the editor or talk to somebody, or people that worked on the film, and I initially built my network a lot that way.
yeah. You're also not shy about talking to anybody, which is a good quality that not all editors have, I should say. They're inherently shyer artists in the filmmaking world. Right?
Yeah.
They're not all as social as you.
No, no, not. Yeah, I think that definitely. I got that a lot my first year.
Yeah. Okay, last thing I'll ask you, tell me the George Clooney story.
The George Clooney story.
Tell me how you broke the rules with the George Clooney story.
I don't know. I don't know if I fully broke the rules with that one.
Really? Did you?
I know I have with other guests, but I think that was the one guest where it kind of organically happened. I don't know what it was. I raised my hand, I asked him a question, and then he looked at me and then he just kept being friendly to me the entire class. May have helped that I was sitting second or close to the front row as
And
well.
you're a tall guy.
Yeah. And then after class he wanted to talk. And he talked to me and
But
everything,
did
and
he initiate a conversation?
he did.
Oh, what did he say?
He was just, he was giving me feedback, like best of luck on your career. I like your questions, and this is a tough industry, but if you, while your director is filming something, if you can get started on it as soon as possible, give them feedback as they're on set with something, that'll take you a long way. And then I think one of your people started like taking pictures of us while we were talking.
Yeah, I had a photographer there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then at that moment, if they're taking pictures, I was like, why not? Right. This was my second year. This was my second year at AFI when that happened.
Yeah.
But I kind of, after I think after I had a picture with who was the guy who played Gaston in in
Oh yeah, that's right. He came. The British guy, Luke Evans.
Luke Evans,
That's
right?
right. I forgot he was here. Yeah. Because we
Yeah,
didn't get a lot of actors here. So that was rare.
Yeah, our first year we were really lucky, I guess. We had Denzel at one point.
Oh yeah, you had wow, that was you had a good run. You had yeah, Luke Evans, and he came with that whole cast, right? Wasn't it Dakota Fanning,
Yeah.
two other actors, and then yeah, you
My teacher, actually, the editing teacher, Martin Nicholson.
mm-hmm.
I think he was the one responsible for that.
That's right, because he edited that show.
Yeah.
And then you had but remember, I don't know if you remember, but Clooney wasn't even supposed to show up. It
Yeah.
was it was supposed to be just his partner, the writer producer of that movie, Suburbicon. And then when that I was in the parking lot waiting for them, and he pulls up, and in the passenger seat, I'm like, that guy looks so familiar. Is he an alum? And I'm like, oh no, that's George Clooney.
Who didn't even know George Clooney was showing up?
No, he wasn't supposed to. It was just supposed to be Grant Heslov. And then, yeah, I mean, we made space for him.
Of course.
We
Sorry,
made space for
you're
him.
not supposed to be here, so
It
call
was
who.
one of the, and it was funny because we only had, you know, how we put the chairs out beforehand. And I was telling George when he got here, I said, oh, we weren't expecting you. And he's like, and he, you know, he's making a joke always. He's like, well, you know, I directed the movie. Are you okay if I join? And I was like, yeah, sure. But we did a bit where Grant, you know, when we started the Q&A, Grant, the writer producer, came out by himself, sat down, and whoever was moderating asked a couple questions. And then George brought his own chair out, walked out with his own chair. And he's like, mind if I join? And put his chair down. And it was just got this huge reaction from the audience because they didn't know that he was coming.
Yeah, that was incredible. That was an incredible moment.
That's what I love. That's some of the stuff that I love about AFI with that our little screening room, like the intimacy of it. It's not like public, you know, it's not streaming live or anything. It's like you can have little fun moments like that, and they're just for the room, you know.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, that was definitely an all timer moment.
Yeah, for sure. All right, brother. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later. Bye.